So, anybody have a question or a comment or an answer? Answer is especially welcome. Yes.
Question, sorry. Can you address what may or may not be going on in terms of attempts at geoengineering?
Ah. Yes.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Of course. The question is, can you address what's going on or maybe not going on with respect to geoengineering? Geoengineering is an approach to engineer the planetary atmosphere. I delivered a presentation Thursday night at the West End Cultural Center, and I talked about geoengineering specifically. In their fifth assessment, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the fifth assessment is due to be released this year, but it's been heavily leaked already. And in that assessment, the IPCC concludes that we've triggered runaway greenhouse in the absence of massive geoengineering of the Earth's chemistry. And they did not suggest what geoengineering strategies might be employed. Since then, 3 scientific papers have come out in the refereed journal literature pointing out that known geoengineering strategies, such as putting more sulfates up into the atmosphere, putting mirrors at the Lagrange L1 point between the sun and here, or dumping a bunch of iron filings into the ocean, and so on. All of those are destined for failure. 2 of the 3 papers point out that they can't work, they won't work. And the 3rd paper points out that they might work in terms of cooling the planet, but they will so alter precipitation patterns around the globe that will be threatened by that instead of by increasing temperatures. A 4th refereed journal paper indicates, based on survey data, that nobody's interested anyway. That human beings on the planet are either so ignorant of the issue or so aware of the issue that they do not support geoengineering. A huge majority do not support geoengineering. So I don't think there's any geoengineering approach that has been proposed that could possibly work. And as nearly as I can tell, nobody's interested anyway. That said, we've been geoengineering for a while. With every pound of fossil fuel we kick into the atmosphere, we're engineering the atmosphere. With the sulfates produced by industrial activity, we're actually cooling the Earth. Clive Hamilton, in his April 2013 book, Earth Masters, points out that when industrial activity fails on the planet, when collapse is complete, the Earth will warm 1.1 C within 3 days or so. We're at 0.85 C right now, plus 1.1, that takes us to 1.95, let's call it 2. The much dreaded by politicians 2 C rise in temperature will come as a result of the completion of collapse. 2 leads quickly to C. 2 leads quickly to 6 degrees C, above baseline. So I don't see any positive results from geoengineering, and I don't think there's much support for any of them. I have such a short question, such a bloated answer. I'll try to do better next time. Yes?
Vis-a-vis the geoengineering thing, our level of understanding of the consequences is very much short of what needs to be really understood. And this brings to mind the law of unintended consequences, which is almost essentially.
Yes, he points out that we don't really know what we're doing with respect to geoengineering. It's interesting, it's only come up in the conversation within the last 4 or 5 years, because it's only been clear within the last 4 or 5 years that climate change threatens us with extinction. So of course we come up with a drastic emergency measure that hasn't been thought through. So your follow-up comment, the law of unintended consequences, of course that's going to come up. We haven't thought about it deeply. So if we try to employ anything at this point, we have no idea what we're going to get. Life is like a box of chocolates, or like geoengineering. You never know what you're going to get. So, absolutely, we don't have a clue what we're doing with respect to engineering the Earth's atmosphere. What we do know is there's 40 years between cause and effect. 40 years between the carbon we emit any greenhouse gas we emit into the atmosphere, and the rise in temperature associated with that. There's such a huge lag between our actions and the consequences. And so, I wasn't even 14 years old 40 years ago. I wasn't driving a car yet, but I sure was looking forward to it. When I was 14 and 15 years old, first learning how to drive a car, I had not a single thought about the consequences because we knew nothing about the consequences. So, as a consequence, I don't feel particularly guilty, even though my generation is, to a very large extent, responsible for the multiple crises we're in. I don't take responsibility for driving that car 38 years ago. I didn't know a thing. And I think that applies to all of us. We couldn't know. We were born into this set of living arrangements. We didn't have a choice. When I came out of the womb, had somebody asked, I might have taken a round trip. My mom wouldn't have thought that was a good idea, right? Nobody asked to be here, but here we are. So let's revel in the miracle that is each of us, and in the miracle that is the living planet that supports us, instead of feeling guilty or feeling bad about what has happened in the past. Mistakes have been made.
Do you talk in your book at all about the age we live in of cell phones, Wi-Fi, magnetic fields that reproduce as humans?
I wrote about that quite a bit more in my previous book, Walking Away from Empire, and not so much in this book. But Louis C.K. is I think the best social critic working today. He's a comedian, and just type in Louis C.K. at YouTube and prepare to be entertained by the next several hours at the absurdity of civilized human beings. It's just, and he points out, that he's about my age. He points out that when he was a kid, we had a phone and you had to stand next to it, and you had to dial it. You know the technology there? You're making sparks, right? And if somebody had too many zeros in their number, you just wouldn't dial. It takes too long. I don't have time for this. You hang up. And the whole thing has become so incredibly absurd. Now you see these kids walking around with their cell phones, right? And they go, it's taking too long. Give it a second. It's going to space. But we're so impatient, we can't wait for 5 seconds for the signal to come back from space. It's a weird world. It's a very weird world. Louis C.K. was struggling in his career. He was in his 30s, and all he was doing was playing really crappy nightclubs. He couldn't get a decent gig, and he had occasion to run into George Carlin. And he told George Carlin, I have this great routine. My timing is awesome. It's hilarious. I've been working on it for years. And George Carlin says, throw it out. You got to start over every year. You don't think there's enough material? I mean, look at what we're doing. It's unbelievable how much material. I could do stand-up myself, and I'm not a funny guy. You heard me read. It's astonishing what we're doing and what we continue to do, and in the name of technology and convenience. Wow.
Do you think it affects migratory birds, whales, butterflies, any of those species?
Tens of thousands of, just as a very minor example, tens of thousands of birds and bats are killed every year by wind turbines and by cell phone towers. So there are direct consequences in terms of the electricity and what kind of impact that has. I don't know. We know, though, that cell phones increase the incidence of cancer, and particularly brain cancer. Monarch butterflies are almost gone this year. The migration is all but over. You look around at every indicator, every single indicator of the living planet, and it's horrific. It's horrible. Every year of my life, nearly 54 years now, every year of my life has been worse than the previous year. Every year we foul more water and dirty more air and wash more of the world's soil into the world's oceans and drive more species to extinction and ratchet up climate change and increase the rate of human population overshoot. And every year is worse than the year before. And everybody I know thinks it's better. I think every year is better than the year before because we have smartphones. Therefore, it's all good. Put the blinkers on. Don't look around. We have smartphones. Life is awesome. And to be fair, life is really, really, really good. We're really, really screwed. But life is really good. Yeah. Right here.
I've read a lot about this, and I've heard about this. My one curious question is, you're very definitive about everything I've read is because of the complexity of Mother Earth, unless there's some catastrophic event we don't have. So I'm very curious why.
And the question is, why 2030? Earth is a very complicated system, and obviously we can't model it very well. And yet you seem to be sticking to 2030. It's actually 2030 plus or minus, 2030 or so. Why that date? Well, 2002, when I was editing this book on climate change, there weren't sufficient data to justify that projection. So it was mostly intuition. After trying to connect a bunch of the dots and put together a bunch of the data, my intuition told me 2030 or so, meaning it might be 2040. Since that time, the evidence has increased substantially. A single assessment of one of those self-reinforcing feedback loops. We've triggered 30 self-reinforcing feedback loops. And the one that we've known the most, the one we've known about the longest, is methane release from the Arctic Ocean. And so there was a Referee Journal article in early 2010 pointed that out. And since then there's been quite a bit of study of that, because it's sometimes called the clathrate gun. Methane clathrates or methane hydrates are what emerge out of the Arctic Ocean, and when the clathrate breaks, it allows the methane to go into the atmosphere. Methane is 100 times more powerful than a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, molecule for molecule. So people have been studying methane now for pretty seriously for 4 years since that paper came out. And so an assessment, a relatively recent assessment, December last year I believe it was, indicates that we've fired the clathrate gun as of 2007, so about 7 years ago now. So we have plenty of evidence that we've managed to accumulate at this point. People tell me all the time, we really won't know until it's been 10 years. And they've been telling me that for 7 years. And now we have 7 years of data to indicate that methane release has gone exponential. Release of that methane and the heating value of methane on Earth indicates that we'll be at more than 4 C above baseline, more than 4 degrees C above baseline by 2030. We've never had humans on this planet at 3.5 C above baseline because of lack of habitat, not because we can't handle the temperature, right? We've all experienced probably 10 C at least going outside to inside, and we're doing fine. And we'll do it again several times today. It's not about that. This is about the ability to grow food. So if we can't grow food, if the planet will not support a marine food web or a terrestrial food web, we're in real trouble. Already, the oceans have acidified to such a point that phytoplankton in the ocean have declined 40% in the last few decades. 40% with 0.85 C warming. At 4 C warning, the acidification is going to be so profound that I doubt any phytoplankton survive. That's half the world's food is in the ocean. Temperature swings associated with 4 C are almost certainly going to preclude the ability to grow plants of essentially any kind. And there's the other half of the food we eat. That same analysis indicates more than 4 C by 2030 and more than 10 C by 2040. And that's a big number. I mean, it's difficult for me to imagine we'll survive 4 C above baseline. 10 C seems inconceivable to me. And there's plenty more evidence emerging on a very regular basis to indicate that the cloth rate gun alone is sufficient to drive us to extinction. That's one of 30 self-reinforcing feedback loops or positive feedbacks that we've triggered. It's interesting, when I wrote the book, I don't know if you noticed when I read it, I said we've triggered more than a dozen. More than a dozen. That was 6 months ago. And we triggered 16 in 2013 alone. 1 in 2010, 4 in 2011, 6 in 2012, 16 in 2013, 1 so far in 2014. So events are playing out, geological events are playing out in real time. Myth that says the Earth stopped warming in about 1998 and has plateaued since then. But we've known for a little over a year that plateau, which is observed in surface records, in terrestrial records of weather and hence climate, is obscuring something really important. 75% of the Earth's surface area is covered with ocean, and heating of the ocean in that 16 years has accelerated profoundly. So it looks like we're dumping a lot of heat into the oceans. Would that be enough to cause the starfish to disintegrate by itself? I don't know. Would that plus Fukushima in interaction be enough? I don't know. This has been too little studied. I'm certain of one thing. I'm certain that the decline of starfish, like the decline of every other species on the planet, can be attributed to industrial civilization in some form or other. So the root of the problem, the root of the issue, is industrial civilization. And that's manifested in many ways, from climate change to nuclear Armageddon to cars that run over turtles crossing the road, to every conceivable aspect of the way we live. When viewing the world as a set of resources instead of viewing other species as a source of relations, that leads us right to where we are today. The world is here for us to exploit, and sure enough we have.
Do you see this destruction happening as a kind of a tipping point where all of a sudden it's just going to drop right off, or do you see this as a period of time?
Yeah, do I see a tipping point in which we just sort of fall off the cliff, or do I see a more gradual decline? A couple of weeks ago, a Wall Street advisor, preferring to remain unnamed, pointed out that the actual unemployment rate in the United States is not 6% as reported by the government. It's 37.2%. 2 years ago, the rate of human death as a result of climate change was about 400,000 people per year dying early deaths as a result of climate change. As of 4 months ago, it's 5 million people a year. So for the 37%, I'd be willing to bet that they think we've fallen off a cliff already. For the families of the 5 million people a year who die early deaths as a result of climate change, I'm guessing they think we're falling off a cliff. It's impacting their lives. When will it impact you? It seems like a steady decay, a steady decline until it does, and then it seems like a cliff. So I think it's a matter of perspective. So from my own personal perspective, we went off a cliff a long time ago. And that's manifest in the 200 species a day we drive to extinction. In the absolute destruction of the soil and the water and the air we need to survive. But when you fall out of a window of a 100-story building, the view just gets better all the way down. It's not the fall that kills you, it's the sudden stop at the bottom. Until we hit the sudden stop at the bottom, I suspect most people won't realize it's a cliff at all. And some might not even realize it's a steady decline.
I agree that we have gone over the cliff quite a bit. But I get a sense from you that there's absolutely nothing people can do to avoid water.
Oh yes,
And I'm wondering
Right.
if you actually have any suggestions for what to do for the next 15 to 25 years besides continue
Besides continue what?
to consume.
Oh,
That's what
okay.
most people-
Right. So people often accuse me of offering no hope. Let me give you a definition straight from my buddies Merriam and Webster. Hope is wishing for an outcome over which one has no agency. Or from Nietzsche, hope is the worst of evils, for it extends the torments of man. Were he not such a misogynist, I'm pretty sure he would have included women in there too. Hope is, as I've learned just this weekend at a retreat at the Dharma Center, hope and fear are two sides of the same coin. We don't know what the future looks like, but we hope for something or fear for something over which we have no control. When people tell me that I'm removing people's hope, I think that's a good thing. When they tell me that people are going to start living like hedonists, I ask them, how the hell would we know the difference? And when asked to give advice, I give 5 pieces of advice, and they're all really the same piece of advice, clothed differently, spoken by different people. One comes from that great moral philosopher Bruce Springsteen, from The Human Touch. In the end, what you don't surrender, well, the world just strips away. And so let's stop living as if the future will be like the recent past. Let's let go. That takes me to my next quote from Zen Buddhism, let go or be dragged. Let go of the notion we can have infinite growth on a finite planet with no consequences for humans and other animals. That's not working. It hasn't worked for a long time. We've known it for a long time. It's time we actually recognize that. Carpe diem, seize the day. When I speak on college campuses, I'm often corrected on the pronunciation. Students tell me, carpe diem? Don't you mean crappy diem? You just ruined my day. Whatever. Or from Nietzsche, live as though the day were here. And what I suggest is that people do the kinds of wacky things they have been afraid to do because of how harshly this culture will judge them. The time is now. You want to do that whacked out crazy thing that you've always wanted to do? You want to walk away from your job and go live in the woods for 6 months because that's how people used to live, and you think you'll give it a try. Why the hell not? Why don't you do those things that culture has warned you about doing, has told you not to? The cultural current is so strong that you haven't been able to break out. Why don't you just break out? Why don't you just go wild, go crazy, do something different than what everybody else is doing? And I'm a huge fan of resistance. Resistance is fertile, and it's a moral imperative. I don't care if it is too late. Chris Hedges, in his piece at Truth Out last Monday, said, I don't fight fascists because I'll win. I fight fascists because they're fascists. We should resist the morally repugnant civilization, industrial economy, this set of living arrangements in which we're embedded. We should resist that because it's wrong, because it's driving to extinction 200 species a day, because it's killing everything we value or should value. Instead, we applaud with every uptick in the Dow Jones Industrial Index. We should resist because it's the right thing to do, even if, especially if there's no hope of it working. Why not now? We get to illustrate our humanity. We're the last individuals who get to do that. Let's get it right. Yeah, Mike.
What's your thoughts on why mainstream media is not all over this? I mean, a small example is just a visit to our city this week, where they had ample opportunity to show interest, to show up, to participate, and met with complete apathy. Why? It's just bad news or no hope, just something on the radar?
Why? Why are the mainstream media not reporting what's going on in the world? how dire the situation is. I had occasion to sit on an airplane next to a poor woman from Salt Lake City. We were flying into Salt Lake City from Tucson, and she was trapped in the window seat, and I had the aisle seat. I feel sorry for these people, really I do, because they did nothing to me. Really? I mean, she says hello. That's the opening I need. And then she doubles down, she finishes a newspaper, she says, would you like to read the newspaper? How ridiculous is that? It just gives me an opening to say, I flip through the newspaper and I say, hey, what do you know? There's not a single mention of the most important event in human history. Rather than ignore me, she says, what do you mean? As if she couldn't have learned her lesson by now. So at this point I have no pity. So, well, you know, we're driving ourselves to extinction because of climate change, blah, blah, blah. And it's not in the media. Of course it's not in the media. Why? Because it's corporate media. There isn't much money in reporting disintegration, decay, and ultimately collapse of industrial civilization. And there's no money in human extinction. People might actually quit their damn jobs and stop buying a bunch of crap they don't need with money they don't have to do things they don't want to do. They might start living in a relatively authentic manner. There's no money in that. Over 90% of the world's media are owned by 6 corporations. So of course they're not going to report anything. I'm pretty sure this would have, had we been in an emergency, an exit row seat, I'm pretty sure she would have opened the damn thing and jumped out by the time we were done. But she just kept going. And finally, I could tell she was a member of a certain church centered in Salt Lake City, because she was talking about her kids and grandkids that had done missions overseas, promulgating civilization to uncivilized areas. It was making my neck hurt really bad. I couldn't stop. And finally, I mentioned extinction for the 300th or 400th time. And she said, I don't think God will let that happen. And I said, you think he'll be pretty impressed with what we've done with the place so far? Are we stewarding the earth as suggested in the book of Genesis? I don't see a lot of stewardship going on here. I digressed a little there, sorry. We've been going for about an hour. Maybe one more question? Maybe not. I'll sign books, I'll hang around, I'll talk to you, answer your individual questions, respond to your comments until the bookstore closes, as long as you want. Thank you. I think you want to say a few words.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us. Please feel free to get a copy of the book signed before paying for it at the front cash desk. And thank you for joining us here at McNally Robinson Booksellers.
Thank you all. I'm just going to sit down right over here. Feel free to come up and chat.